Hi there. Welcome to Module 6, Management Perspective. This is by far one of the most involving modules or chapters in the syllabus. However, the examiner has not really examined much from this section of the syllabus. I don't know why, but maybe because the modules or things here are more or less contained in the level 1 business management and information system, because here we are going to be discussing various types of organizational structure. We are going to look at leadership theories, and we'll look at issues about marketing, human resource management, communication, motivation. I think the reason why the examiner has not really tested and has been silent over the period, there are some questions that he has asked from this session though, but the content in here and the questions that has been asked in the past is relatively very small, less than like 5% or something like that in the past, in the last 4 or 5 examination sittings that I'm talking about, to be specific. So, management perspective, at the end of this module, you should be able to understand the various types of organizational structures. You should be able to understand the importance of organizational structures. You should be able to explain the various leadership theories that we'll be going through. Then you should be able to explain the concepts of marketing, human resource management, among other stuff. So let's begin the journey. What is organizational structure? But first, before we define what organizational structure is, that is, we have to look at what an organization is. So an organization is simply defined as a social arrangement which pursues collective goals, which controls its own performance, and has a boundary separating it from its environment. So an organization can be defined as what? A social arrangement, all right, in that order. But what is an organizational structure? An organizational structure can simply be defined as the various ways through which authorities' information is transported within an organization, or the hierarchy of authority within an organization. To be able to understand organizational structures, there are various things that we have to take into consideration in that order. Organizational structures are important for companies because every company must have the organizational structure. The CEO, the board of directors, the department, and then under each department there are divisions, okay? That's the organizational structure. It shows the level of authority, it shows the flow of information, it shows who responds to what, it shows also the span of control within the organization. So what are the importance of organizational structure? One, it shows who is responsible for what. I've already mentioned that. It shows who communicates with whom. I've also mentioned that. It shows the hierarchy of authority and the subordinates, yes. It shows the span of control in the organization. Then it shows the level of bureaucracy within the organization. Now, if we want to understand the issue about organizational structure, there are basically what we call classification of organizational structure. There are 2 classifications of organizational structure. All the organizational structure of companies can be categorized into what we call self-contained organizational structure and boundaryless organizational structure. You have to be able to follow me well to understand these 2 things. When we say a self-contained organizational structure, it is where the organization has the ability to spontaneously arrange its components and elements in purposeful manner under appropriate conditions, but without the help of external agencies. So with self-contained organizational structure, the organization is independent, it is on its own, so does not depend on any relationship outside in the undertaking of its responsibilities. Then the boundaryless organizational structure, this involves the organization collaborating with the outside parties to make it more flexible during times of what? Changes. Right, so let's now narrow down our attention to look at the various types of self-contained organizational structure. The first one is called functional structures. This is where the structure is designed in relation to the various departments or functions within the organization. So if you look into your study notes there, I have the functional organizational structure where I have top management, where I have various departments, and where I have divisions. So it is where we design the flow of information, we design the span of control, we design the flow of information in relation to, or the flow of authority in relation to who does what within the organization. So based on the functions. So we have the sales department, we have the finance department, we have the production department, we have the marketing department, those kind of things. Okay, in that order when it comes to the functional organizational structure. The next one is called the multi-divisional structure. This is where the organization is defined into semi-autonomous divisions that may be different by territory, products, or markets. So sometimes organization has various divisions or territories. So it can divide it into the northern division, into the southern division, or into, yes, so the northern and the southern division. So that is it when we talk about a multi-divisional strategy. Normally this is adopted by companies that produce more than one product or companies that operate in more than one territory or locations. As such, they want to and have various branches in these locations. So they want to bring all those branches, all those departments into multi-division structures in that order. Then we have the holding company structure. This is an extreme form of divisionalization where each division is a separate legal entity. So here it is like a divisionalization, but here each division is a separate legal entity on its own. So it is more or less like a parent or a group structure. So we have the parent company and we have the subsidiaries. So like back to my example on GN or group Indium, we have the group, the parent company, then we have the group GN insurance, then we have the GN bank, then we have the GN money, whatever, GN, everything GN in that order. GN electricity, GN security, GN hospitalities and hotels, that kind of thing. That is what we refer to as what? The holding company structure. Here, each division is seen as a separate legal entity on its own. So there is a relationship like a parent-subsidiary relationship in that order. Third, or the next one is the matrix organizational structure. This structures attempts to ensure coordination across functional lines by embodiment of dual authority in organizational structures. What does this mean? What it means is that, for instance, somebody can be the head of the a division, then can be also the head of a function or a department in the entire organization in that order. So this is the combination of functional structures with other organizational structures. Now, so if you look at the diagram that I have there, you will see that I have, I'm finding it difficult to read though, my diagram there. Yeah, so you could see that I have the manufacturing there, I have the various departments there. So what a matrix organizational structure tries to do is to combine functional structures with what? Other organizational structures. So you are performing a functional structure as, for instance, the head of the production department, but you can at the same time become the head of a division, okay, in that order. So that is what we mean by the matrix organizational structure in that order. Then the next one is the transnational organizational structure. This structure attempts to reconcile global scope and scale with what? Local perspective. Now, when we talk about management and managers in globalization, two names come to mind. That is Professor A. Ballett of Harvard Business School and then Samantha Ghoshal. They published a book called Managing Across Borders, the Transnational Solution. And in that book, they describe that transnational organizational structures have two important features. One, it responds specifically to the challenges on the global level, and then two, it tends to have a high proportion of fixed responsibilities in the horizontal line of management of the organization. So that is what we mean by the transnational organizational structure. Here, the organization has branches in other countries, so it's going to have a transnational organizational structure. The next one is called the team-based structure. Since each organization or business consists of various processes. This type of structure helps the organization to put together a group of individuals with required skills to manage specific processes of what? The business. So this is where the organization put together a team of experts. So when we are launching a new product, or the organization wants to launch a new product, it is going to put together a research and development team. In that research and development team, we're going to have the production manager there, we're going to have the sales manager there, we're going to have the finance director there, we're going to have a member of the sales and distribution there. So we're going to have, that is a team together to undertake a specific objective of the organization. At the end of that, the team continues to exist in that order. Then we have the project-based structure. Now, this is similar to team, but here we put together the individual to undertake a project, and at the end of the project, the team is what? Dissolved in that order. So these are some examples of various types of organizational structures that exist in what we call a self-contained organizational structure. The next thing we want to consider is choosing a design. How can organization determine or assess the appropriate organizational structure? How can the organization say, we want to look at the functional organizational structure, we want to look at the transnational organizational structure? How can they determine that? To be able to answer that, we are going to borrow the thoughts of Gould and Campbell, and they put together 9 benchmarks that organizations have to follow to test which organizational structure that will be good for them. These 9 benchmarks has been subdivided into 2 broad categories. The first category is according to the organizational objectives and the restraints it must consider. So, based on the organizational objective, Gould and Campbell says that in the designing of organizational structure, in the choosing of an organizational structure, or in the determination of an organizational structure for the company, based on the organizational objective, the organization has to look at their marketing advantage. So the proposed structure must fit into the marketing objectives of the organization to enable the organization to gain competitive advantage. So based on our objective, any structure we are choosing must be able to be fit into our marketing strategy as a company. 2, parenting advantage. Since a lot of companies have subsidiaries across, the structure must support the parenting role played by the corporate center. That is what I was talking about in relation to something like the holding organizational structure, because there has to be what we call parenting and subsidiary relationship. So the organizational structure has to support that scheme in that order. Next one is people test. The proposed structure must suit the skills and experience of the people that have to function or work within it. So we must look at the fact that the new organizational structure that we are implementing, we have the labor force there, we have the technical know-how there in relation to successfully implementing and successfully undertaking that organizational structure by the organization. And then the last one, based on the organizational objective, is the feasibility test. This simply talks about other factors that has to be taken into consideration, such as laws, stakeholders' opinion, resource availability. These are referred to as other constraints of the company. So what Gould and Campbell is talking about is that when we are deciding which organizational structure we have to use, there are 9 benchmarks. 4 of those benchmarks relates to the organizational objective. That is the marketing advantage of the company. That is the parenting advantage of the company. That is the people test, whether we have the employees, and that is the feasibility test, whether we have the resources available, what is the expectation of our stakeholders, and whether we really are undertaking a strategy that forms within the scope of the laws of the land. Aside that, Gould and Campbell said that we have to also consider matters of design principles. These are issues that have to be considered in relation to the implementation and execution of the structure. So aside, now we've looked at the marketing advantage. It fits into our marketing advantage. We have looked at the parenting advantage. There is no issue. We've looked at the people test. Yes, we have the employees there. We've looked at the feasibility test. Yes, there is no problem in relation to that. But we must look at the various factors that have to be considered so that when we implement the organizational structure, when we are executing the organizational structure, it will be well. The first one is called the specialized culture. The organization already has a culture within which it operates, and it's known to all stakeholders. However, a proposed structure may change this culture, which may result into a lot of friction and disorders. So the organization has to look at the fact that people already understand how things are done within the organization. Proposing a new organizational structure means there is going to be a change in how things are done within the organization. This can result into a lot of friction, a lot of disorder, a lot of rejection on behalf or on the part of some stakeholders of the company. The first one is the difficult link. Now, it is difficult to combine some department, because if you are dealing with something like the matrix organizational structure, when you are combining some functional organizational structure with other organizational structure, it is difficult to combine some of the department into one single department if you are adopting a different organizational structure. So that has to also be considered. Then, redundancy hierarchy. Proposed organizational structure may mean that probably we don't have the technical know-how, we don't have the people, the employees, so there has to be new employees that must come on board. This may lead to redundancy within the organization, so the organization has to also assess that. Then accountability. Built into every organizational structure, there has to be a system of accountability where we'll be able to measure the performance of the organizational structure and compare it with what? The objective of the organizational structure, to see whether the organizational structure implemented is affecting its objective. And the final thing is that every organizational structure adopted, designed, implemented, or executed must be flexible so that it will allow for future changes to be taken into consideration. So these are what we have to understand in relation to designing or choosing an organizational structure. Then the next thing we want to talk about, in that order. So the next thing we want to talk about is the boundaryless organizational structures. The boundaryless organizational structures. These include the following. 1. Hollow organizational structure. With this structure, the organization classifies activities into core processes and non-core processes, and the organization outsources non-core processes and focuses on core activities that actually add value. Remember what we did under value chain analysis? I mentioned that the organization will look at the primary activities and then the supporting activities, so that the organization can focus on the core activities. So where an organization is only focusing on its core activities and outsourcing almost all supporting activities, then it means the organization is adopting what we call the hollow organizational structure. The next one is called the modular organizational structure. Now, this is similar to the modular organizational structure in that the organization outsources some part of its production process to specialists to provide, and then later assemblies the outsourced components in-house to produce the final products. This is usually used by companies that produce airplanes, that produce cars, that manufacture or build ships in that order. So in relation to the production of those products, like car manufacturing companies, they outsource part of the car. So a company produces the engine, another company produces the tires, another company produces the windscreens, another company produces maybe the seats, in that order. So they outsource these various component parts of the main product to specialists. Then they now bring it in-house and assemble all of them to produce the finished product. That is what we refer to as the modular organizational structure. Then other modules that we can talk about involves outsourcing, offshoring, shared services, alliances, virtual organizational structure. This is where the organization doesn't really have a location, okay? You can't trace it. It doesn't have any business center, but usually does everything electronically in that order. Collaborative organizational structure. This is where the organization requires information and will go to the outside world and ask them in that order. So these are what you have to understand when it comes to management perspective of the organization, and I'll see you in the next module.